What's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the All In Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, as always, Eli Cooper, and I'm joined, as always, by my other co-host, Mike Badzik. How's it going today, man?
It's going good. Excited to learn some things in this episode. I had an abysmal start to my fantasy football season, so I am happy to be here and be a student in this episode.
All right,
yeah, man. So if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all the places we're going live right now, we are joined by Dave, from Fantasy Pros and Pregame HQ. He's a fantasy football writer and editor for those outlets. So, Dave, why don't you give us a little bio on your career so far?
Right on. Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having me.
No problem.
I'm from Chicago. Been a huge sports fan my whole life. About a year ago, I started working with Fantasy Pros on their news correspondence desk, where we try to be one of the first to break all the major stories. So, obviously Schefter and Pelissero and those guys are beating us, but we try to just correspond that news as quickly as possible. So I do NBA, MLB, and NFL for them. And then on August 1st, I started working with Elvin Ryan and his new website, the Pregame HQ, which I highly recommend checking out. We've been pumping out some great content there. It's the pregamehq.com, and I'm a writer and editor for them.
Awesome, man. Awesome. So we appreciate you coming on the show, man, giving our listeners and us some fantasy advice for week 2 of the NFL, which we're going to get into. So for those of you tuning in, if you're watching on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, throughout the show, send us any start or sit or fantasy advice questions. We'll try to get to all of them. We'll have some from social media that we had from the last couple of days that we'll be asking Dave towards the end of the episode. So send those to us in the comment section, and we'll place your comment up on screen. Like my guy Day Don't Play here, tuning in on Twitter. So thank you guys again for tuning in. If you're listening on audio, obviously we're back from the break. We just talked about the Clippers losing to the Nuggets in Game 7 in the Eastern Conference Finals as well. And if you're watching on YouTube on the replay, you can catch that on our YouTube channel here. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button that you're seeing. So let's get right into it, man. We got some week 2 games, a lot of good matchups coming up this week. And, starting with the Eagles, my hometown team.
Go Birds.
We had a tough loss. We had a tough loss to start the season. And it doesn't get any easier for us here in week 2 with the Rams. So, Mike, what's one thing you're looking forward to in this game?
I think it's got to be Wentz. I think we have to look at Wentz and say, are you this franchise quarterback or are you not? Week 1, it looked like you were not. Now, you've discussed as the Eagle, expert and fan how he's so much better when Lane Johnson plays. Well, I think Lane Johnson's going to play this week.
Yeah.
So I'll be watching for Carson Wentz to see. I am high on the Rams. I've been high on the Rams. I've been talking about them and how I think that they're going to be one of the best teams in the NFC and make this run. And that involves a lot of things with Jared Goff improving and their defense being a little bit more opportunistic. But for me, I think the biggest thing is Wentz.
Yeah, agreed. And I think getting Lane Johnson back will help.
Yeah.
He's not going to see, a ton of Aaron Donald, I don't think, because he usually plays, a little more interior. So I don't know if that really helps with that specifically. But I think him being back, it looks like Miles Sanders is on track to play as well. So that could certainly help. Is they didn't really look confident in giving the ball to Boston Scott or Corey Clement last week. Neither of those two really got a ton of touches. So Dave, what's your thoughts just on the game in general coming into this one? What are some of the keys for the Eagles and Rams?
Well, I mean, that's the biggest thing for me, too, is I'm going to be keeping an eye on Wentz. He's coming off a pretty horrific week 1. You already mentioned Lane Johnson, but you also got Alshon Jeffrey out of that game. You had Miles Sanders out of that game. You had Deshaun Jackson coming back for his first time in almost a year after that core surgery. He only played, I think 52% of the snaps or something like that.
Right.
Jalen Reagor was dealing with something. So, I mean, that's a banged up arsenal. It's really tough for anybody to succeed in a situation like that. Yeah. So I think people are quick to forget, but, Wentz was a QB 10 last year. He was, finished 10th overall. Back in 2018, he was QB5. I mean, when he's got a good staff around him and a good team of players, he can ball out. So I'm hoping that he can just kind of put that one on the shelf behind him and have another vintage Carson Wentz performance this week.
So assuming Miles Sanders, Lane Johnson are healthy, from a fantasy perspective, are you starting Wentz this week in 10 team leagues?
100%. Yeah. I mean, it's such a cliche in fantasy, but start your studs, and Wentz really is a stud. He's had some injuries that have, made people forget how good he is. But as far as I can see, he's not on the injury report right now. And if he's playing, you got to start him.
So from the Rams perspective, their offense looked a little bit different. Without Todd Gurley, first time in a while we've seen them without him, and also without Brandon Cooks, who moved on to the Houston Texans this offseason as well. Pretty much look the same though, like as far as their schemes and how they approach the game. Robert Woods looked incredible in week 1. But Tyler Higbee, someone we thought might be, a little more involved in the offense, had a pretty silent night against the Cowboys. So Dave, what's your thoughts on Tyler Higbee? Does he bounce back this week?
I don't think so. I wasn't really a big Higbee fan going into this season. If you look at it, he did his best when Gerald Everett was out. And when they've got both of those tight ends healthy, he really hasn't done that much. So I haven't really been a huge Higbee fan. I think, if you drafted him, you put some decent stock into his value. And at this point, you got to ride him out for at least a few more weeks. But there's a lot of good guys popping up on the waiver wire right now. Logan Thomas, he's coming off a really nice week. So there's some other guys that I think you should look out for and at least stash on your bench. Ride with Higbee for a little bit, but I don't think it's a terrible idea to start looking elsewhere. Cam Akers, though, he's the guy that I'm going to be keeping a really close eye on this week. It looked like it was Malcolm Brown's backfield, but I'm not really buying it yet. My thought process is that, McVay, a lot of people blame him for all of Gurley's problems. They say that he just ran Gurley into the ground. So McVay, he's a young, flexible coach. I think he's pretty savvy, and I think we're going to see a committee coming out of this backfield in Los Angeles. So Akers, he's still a pretty raw talent. I know he was struggling a little bit in camp with picking up some pass protection, but I think it's going to be kind of a weird hot hand approach in that. So I'm going to be keeping a close eye on Akers in the backfield for sure to see how that pans out.
So are you starting any of these Rams backs this week?
No.
I mean, all of them.
Can't touch them.
If you absolutely had to, I mean, I'm somebody that invests heavily in running backs when I draft, so I'm not picking anybody up off the waiver wire and starting them this early. But I guess if you had to choose, you'd want to go with Malcolm Brown just because he got the majority of the carries. I think he had 18 last week, and Akers had 14. But you got Darrell Henderson in the mix too. It's if you're one of those guys that lost your running back early and you don't have a choice, Malcolm Brown's probably the way to go, but I'm avoiding that backfield 100%.
Yeah, and especially with Malcolm Brown, because we kind of saw this last year, right, where he had this explosive week 1. Now it was on less touches, but we saw him have this big week 1 and then duds for the rest of the season, obviously, as they continue to go to Gurley. Now, granted, there's no Gurley there, so maybe he has more of an opportunity to I don't want to say repeat that performance, but continue to be, a relevant fantasy back and really hold on to this job in general. But Darrell Henderson was also coming off injury. So, we really don't know how he's going to factor in as far as snap counts and carries and things like that go. Cause I think they still like him. You know what I mean? I don't think they've given up on him just yet. So
yeah,
I think
he's crazy talented.
Yeah. So I don't, long term, I don't really love the idea of Malcolm Brown, or anything like that. Maybe, like you said, if a deeper league or if you absolutely need to, you're starting Malcolm Brown, but not with a lot of confidence, in my opinion.
Right. If you're a Malcolm Brown owner at this point, I think the best thing you could do is hope for a big week 2 and then try to trade him. Because I think everybody kind of realizes that he's going to start trending downward over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, any last thoughts on Eagles Rams?
No, I mean, I agree 100% with you, Dave, on the Rams backfield situation. And actually, assuming it's just 2 of them now, if Henderson throws his name in the ring, that's going to really be, anytime you're in a 3-man backfield, it's tough to justify a start for any of them. But if it's an Akers and Brown split, there is a world where both of them are still viable options, especially in deeper leagues. I think Buffalo has potential for that too with Moss and Singletary.
Yeah.
There sometimes you get teams who do run enough. I know the Rams are seen as high power, but they actually do run the ball quite a bit. You could actually see both of them fantasy relevant for the rest of the year.
Yeah. So Dave, real quick before we move on to our next matchup, any DFS players, sleepers that you might be looking into for this game particularly?
After just bashing on the backfield, Akers actually is a solid DFS play. He's not somebody I want to pick up in my leagues. He's not somebody I would have drafted, but he's got some pop. If he gets he can break one off at any time. So given his cheaper price, he's a pretty solid play that you could pick up in DFS this week. And then you just got to cross your fingers and hope you can rip off a big one.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So let's get moving on. I think this one might arguably be the best game of the week. Ravens versus Texans. Lamar Jackson versus Deshaun Watson, two of the top young QBs in the league coming up this week. But that Ravens defense is pretty stingy coming into this one. So we'll start with Mike here. What are some things you're looking for in this matchup as far as the game in general?
As far as the game in general and not necessarily fantasy, but kind of fantasy related, is Deshaun Watson and what he does without DeAndre Hopkins. He was probably the angriest man on Sunday. He played Thursday night, and then Sunday he's probably watching the games and just thinking to himself, like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, we gave up this guy for nothing. Like, so he was probably the angriest dude. Like, you just wonder what he's going to be able to do without D-Hop and with the weapons he does have. Now, he had pretty relevant fantasy performance on Thursday. A lot of it was rushing. But I want to see what he does. And then the Ravens, so I might have to be eating crow about the Ravens. And Sean says Ravens by 30. Before the season, I did pick the Steelers to win that division, and I was expecting a little bit of a comeback for Lamar Jackson as far as throwing the ball, where doesn't look like that's about to happen. They looked fantastic, albeit against the Brownies. But so I might be wrong about that one, and I'd be fine too. But yeah, Lamar has been great. We'll see if he can keep that up. And then I think Deshaun Watson. I want to know how is he gonna how is he gonna move forward without DeAndre Hopkins?
Yeah, so that's the biggest thing, especially this is going to be one of the tougher defenses that Deshaun Watson sees all year. Mm-hmm. Honestly, they made Baker Mayfield look like a high school quarterback last week. So, I don't expect it to be that bad for Deshaun Watson, but, without DeAndre Hopkins, this is a really tough match, especially because that Ravens secondary is so stingy. So Dave, what are some of the keys to this one for Ravens versus Texans?
Well, it looks like Cooks is still dealing with some sort of hamstring injury. I mean, I feel like that guy's been on the injury report for 3 years straight now. I don't know if he'll ever get off of it. But, you mentioned the DeAndre Hopkins trade, and they brought in David Johnson, and I get it. Bill O'Brien caught so much flack for that trade. He tried playing it off, saying it was a financial thing, and you saw it. DeAndre Hopkins just got paid big, and I don't think Houston had that money to pay DeAndre Hopkins. But, I've been in love with David Johnson this offseason. And he showed week one, that he's going to be a pretty valuable part. So Bill O'Brien, he gave the ball to Carlos Hyde 245 times last year. Carlos Hyde had 245 carries. So you don't think that they're going to give even more to David Johnson? I think that guy's going to be a steal this year. I'm huge on David Johnson. I'm expecting him to kind of be the focal point of the offense, and we'll see if they can get away from, leaning so heavily on DeAndre Hopkins. I think David Johnson is going to be the new guy that they're going to be kind of revolving that game plan around.
Yeah, and I was actually pretty high on him too, because I felt like this was going to be kind of like a restart for him. Mm-hmm. Moving on from Arizona after essentially losing the job to Kenyon Drake and really even Chase Edmonds, if we're being honest. But I think this offense is a little bit better for him, and we saw it in week one. He was great. Not sure that those results will be the same here in week two again against a tough Ravens defense. Yeah. So before we get into the fantasy aspect, let's make some predictions here. Who do we have out of Ravens and Texans?
I got the Ravens for sure. It's hard to bet against them right now. I mean, what they've been doing since Lamar Jackson took over is just unstoppable. You just got to assume that they're going to win every single week unless they get proved wrong.
Yeah, I'm not picking the Ravens here. The way they looked in week 1, 7-point favorites on the road. Now I don't know what home field advantage means this year, but 7-point favorites on the road. I'm down on the Texans here. I think this is. I saw a comment about Bill O'Brien and all the bad trades he's made. I think this is maybe the year where it starts to catch up with him, and maybe it's a down year for the Texans. But so I got to go with the Ravens.
Yeah, I'm taking the Ravens. I'm taking them to cover in this one too. So, I think that's pretty much a no-brainer. I just wanted your prediction so that you as a Steelers fan would have to say that the Ravens are going to win the game.
Oh, brother.
That's all I really
Listen,
need.
I am the least biased host on this show, okay? I never let personal team affiliations affect my picks.
But before we move on to the next game, can we just talk about Mark Andrews just for a second? Because I was a huge Mark Andrews hater this offseason. Everybody was saying he's going to have this regression, and I was one of them. This guy was touchdown dependent last year, but he went out last week, only had 5 catches and turned 2 of them into a touchdown. And the biggest thing is he had never played more than 56% of his snaps before. He played 71% last week, so I'm eating crow on all that Mark Andrews hate. That dude looks like the real deal right now.
Yeah, definitely. So let's before we move on to the next one, let's talk about some fantasy guys here in this matchup. So Deshaun Watson, 10-team league. Are you still riding with him this week, even against the tough Ravens defense?
Yeah, I've actually got him as a QB6 just because I'm sorry, like the 6th overall quarterback, because I think they're going to be down, and that's kind of when Deshaun Watson is at his best. He's a competitor, and a lot of those slow-moving games where they're just kind of churning out yards, those are the ones that he struggles in. He can usually hold his own in the shootout, so I expect to see a big game from Deshaun Watson this week.
Agreed. So any fantasy players for season long that you're looking at might be a little higher value than normal this week?
Mark Andrews, man.
Mark Andrews.
Until he proves me wrong, that dude is a touchdown machine.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So next game, which I think this one, I know I said this about Ravens Texans, but I think this one here is the game of the week. We got Pats versus Seahawks. Cam Newton, Sunday Night Football against Russell Wilson. Both teams coming off of week 1 wins. So let's talk about the Pats a little bit, because Cam Newton looked really good, looked really healthy again, in his first game back after a pretty, almost a year off essentially, and then a pretty sketchy offseason for him. And we weren't sure where he was going to end up, whether he was even going to be a starter, for a guy who was a former MVP. So Dave, is Cam Newton a top 10 fantasy quarterback for you this week against the Seahawks?
I think it's tough to put him in the top 10 right now, but he is somebody that I'm pretty high on. Drafted him in a lot of my drafts, and I've got him sitting on my bench right now. He's going to be a great bye week fill-in. I think he's got to prove a little bit more. But there's no question that a quarterback that can use his legs has a special value. And he was second in yards behind Kyler Murray last week. He had 75 yards. Everyone was expecting to see 2020 Cam Newton, but somehow Bill Belichick was able to pull out 2015 Cam Newton. I mean, he was just balling. So, I mean, if he can do it again for another week, I think you got to have the conversation that he becomes a weekly starter in the top 10.
And see, I think that's the thing about, we weren't really sure about Cam Newton because we've never seen the Patriots under Bill Belichick with a quarterback like Cam Newton, just from play style in general, right?
Yeah.
Were they going to use him like Cam Newton, or were they going to try to protect him, or, you know what I mean? Because of all the health injuries, they're like, nah, go be Cam Newton. You know what I mean? Ran him 15 times ran him often on the goal line. So to me, that gives him from a fantasy perspective, that gives him a lot of value. And really, I think it's big for this offense that kind of doesn't really have a big play threat. I think having Cam Newton as a true dual threat and not really holding back that part of his game kind of opens things up for them offensively. I think he's going to have to do more with his arm than he did in week 1, of course. I only threw the ball 19 times and for 150, just over 150 yards. And no touchdowns. Obviously, especially here against the Seahawks, he's going to have to do more with his arm. So that's probably the thing that I'm looking at. When his volume has to go up throwing the ball, does the efficiency drop?
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, it certainly can. But one thing that we've seen Bill Belichick do throughout his entire time as a coach is adapt to the personnel that he has. When they've got good running backs, they run the heck out of the ball. When they've got good receivers, I mean, you remember with Randy Moss, what did he catch? 21, 22 touchdowns. And I mean, they were airing it out that year. So he adapts to the personnel that he has. Exactly. And right now, the number one person on that personnel list should be Cam Newton. He's the most valuable player for the time being. And, we've seen a lot of teams have success. The Ravens with a running quarterback. So I think Bill Belichick's going to adapt, and they're likely going to be a pretty run-heavy team this year.
Yeah, they think they are too. And now 15 carries for Cam, that's a lot. I don't know if that's a sustainable number, like 15 carries, like for a quarterback. And it's also like the way he runs. Like Lamar Jackson, 15 carries is a lot different than Cam Newton, 15 carries. Like Lamar is going to be, he's going to get out of bounds and slide pretty, a little more eagerly than Cam is, who wants to get every yard. And a lot of time he's running around the goal line there where there's really no room for him to slide. Like he's almost forced into contact there when he's the power back on the goal line. Now it's good for a fantasy perspective. If he's the power back on the goal line, like that means a lot of 6-point touchdowns instead of 4-point touchdowns for Cam. So I like him from that perspective. I think maybe they need to find a little bit better of a balance between the rushing and the passing, though.
Yeah, agreed. So, Dave, let's talk from a DFS standpoint. In this game, give me one player each team that you're looking at from a possible, DFS standpoint this week.
Tyler Lockett, he's been slipping down a little bit. Everyone's expecting DK Metcalf to come in there and just supplant his role as the number one wide receiver. Both guys got 8 targets last week. The difference is DK had 4 catches. Tyler Lockett brought in all 8 of his. Wow. I'm sure you guys saw that they highlighted on Red Zone a few times. DK had a huge drop. He struggled with drops last year. Russell Wilson looks his way a lot, but if he keeps struggling with drops, I think that, he's going to start leaning on his veteran Tyler Lockett, who's as sure-handed as they come. So I like Tyler Lockett. Just, he's consistently ranked in that, 20 to 25 area, but he can pop off as, a top 5 guy any single week. And then the guy that I like on the Patriots, and I'm sure I'll catch some flack for this, but I like Sony Michel. Yeah. Like I said, I think that the Patriots are going to adapt to the personnel that they have. And, Cam Newton, like you said, he can't carry the ball 15 times a week, but I think that they are going to start leaning a little bit more heavily on the run. And I expect to see Sony Michel be most involved in that.
Yeah, I think we see more involvement from Sony Michel as well, especially from week 1. Like, go back to Mike's point, Cam ran the ball 15 times. It's probably not sustainable. So that, probably bodes well for Sony Michel going forward, that you're expecting a little more carries in that for him at least.
I was kind of worried about Julian Edelman coming into the year with Cam. I didn't know how much they were going to use him. It wasn't going to be like how they did with Tom, certainly. But actually, he was pretty solid there. 7 targets, I think, 5 catches. Now, do you have anything nice to say about DK Metcalf? Because I'm a DK Metcalf owner.
Same.
You kind of hurt me with that.
I like him. The guy's just a freak athlete. You can't deny that. But yeah, that's all I got to say nice about him. The guy's a freak athlete.
Oh,
but I really want him to reel those drops in, though. That's not a way to sustain a long, healthy career is if you keep dropping balls.
Yeah.
Definitely. So now let's move on to the Monday night game, Saints versus Raiders. Now in this one, we had some pretty big injury news. Michael Thomas, who was pretty ineffective in week 1, and mostly because he has this high ankle sprain that he's dealing with. And it's been reported that he's going to miss out on, it looks like several weeks from what they're saying with this high ankle sprain. Mm-hmm. And, that's obviously he's a huge part of the Saints offense. So, Mike, we'll start with you just from a game standpoint, non-fantasy standpoint. How do they make up for that production?
I don't know. Especially on the quick passes. Maybe Kamara gets more involved. He would be the natural guy. I would think if they want to do the quick pass thing on first and second down, maybe their screens and slips to or swings to Kamara instead of the slants to Michael Thomas. I don't know. This was my big question for Dave because I'm a Michael Thomas owner in one league, And I'm thinking, like, who do I replace him with? Like, who's making up the production? Is it Emmanuel Sanders? Is it Jared Cook gets more looks? Is it Taysom Hill as a, maybe they just do more funky stuff with him? I'll ask Dave.
Well, I think Jared Cook is kind of the the easy answer. I think that Jared Cook is definitely going to see a little uptick in targets. He's got a similar build to Michael Thomas. He's a big guy, strong hands. He can body up on a defender and get that. But I'm going to have all my eyes on Emmanuel Sanders because I want to see what this guy can do. He got brought in new. He doesn't have the same rapport with Drew Brees that a lot of other guys there do have. But, he's got a history of success with multiple quarterbacks. He's moved around in a few different teams. He's had quarterback changes, and he's always been able to grind it out. He's never had a quarterback as good as Drew Brees. So I think this is an opportunity for him to really, really step up and show everybody how good of a football player he actually is. So, it's not somebody that I'd be, throwing trade offers out for or buying in DFS, but I'm going to have really close eyes on him this week because I want to see if he can step up.
Yeah. So, and one of the names that we've seen thrown out there is Tre'Quan Smith, has been kind of floated out there. Obviously you're picking him up from the waiver wire if you're playing him at all. Is this someone that can give you any kind of fantasy value this week?
Yeah, right now you got more vacated targets with Michael Thomas being out than if any other receiver was out in the league. So I think it's worth, a shot in the dark in DFS, pick him up, hope for the best. But I think Cook is going to be the guy that's going to benefit the most from MT being out.
Agreed. Yeah. So, in this case, let's talk about the Raiders a little bit. We saw first round pick Henry Ruggs look pretty decent, caught a long ball, almost scored in his NFL debut. Now Saints have a pretty tough secondary. Could be a little bit of a challenge for him. Is Henry Ruggs startable as a flex play this week?
I think so. Gruden has been singing his praises. He said that I don't know if you saw his quote, but he said that Ruggs was actually hurt during that entire game and labeled him as one of the greats, saying, being able to play through injury is what the great players do. He said that he's looking to get him more involved.
I love Gruden.
I mean, that dude, seriously, how can you not? But when you got a guy with wheels like that, sky's the limit. All it takes is one play. He can score from anywhere on the field. So he's a risky flex play, but he's also got some of the highest reward of anybody else in that tier.
Yeah, definitely. Mike, any thoughts? Last thoughts on Saints Raiders?
I have a question, and we will not, give names of who offered who what. Would you accept this? Who would you rather have? Who would you rather have? DK Metcalf and Henry Ruggs offered for Joe Mixon.
I'm a running back guy. I'd go with Mixon on that one.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
Yeah,
he declined my trade. He declined it.
Well, here's why. Let me defend myself. All right.
So hold on, Mike. This was you trying to get.
I tried to give up Mixon for Metcalf and Ruggs, and Eli would not take it.
I'd take it, Eli.
I was going to. I was going to take the trade. I really was. Here's the problem. So we're in a 12-team league with 2 flex spots. We have basically extra flex, no defense. So my receiving core right now is DJ Moore, Metcalf, Gallup, Ruggs. Those are like my 4 guys. My bench is pretty thin, as you can imagine. A 12-team league is that kind of depth is a little tough on your bench. Yeah. So I'm giving up 2 of those 4 guys and kind of like relying on Gallup as my number 2 receiver. And I have Travis Kelce, which kind of helps, right? So you don't need as strong of a receiving core, I guess, if you have Travis Kelce. And then I have Drake and Eckler as my running backs. So I need Mixon for the running back depth because I have no one behind these 2. But if I give up both of those receivers, I have no receiver depth, like at all.
I like it, man. I like Gallup. I'm huge on Gallup here.
I like Gallup too. My only issue is like I have 2 other flex. I'm going to have another flex spot to fill. Right. And there's not really going to be anyone viable to go there. So I have Higbee on my bench. I can live with him as my tight end. So I'm trying to move Kelce for like a wide receiver too. And no one wants to give up a wide receiver 2 for Kelsey in our league as well. So I'm trying to wheel and deal and trying to fill out my roster. And it wasn't working out.
Was in trouble because we have this extra flex spot, and I have Mike Evans, and Mike Evans is hurt. So I'm hurting right now, Dave. Okay, because we have this 12 team extra flex spot. I'm trying to get these 2 guys for Joe Mixon. I'm thinking Eli's my podcast partner. He'll sympathize. He'll help me out. I mean, we're like best friends. He's basically the godfather of my dog.
Oh, come on.
Come on. Like, I figured he would help me out. Nothing. No love.
Oh, man. I'm not going to get involved in this one too much. It sounds like it's getting personal at this point.
Listen. So,
getting the dog involved? Come on, man.
Yeah. And and actually, Chris, I'm glad Crystal made this comment here. We had a discussion about Kelsey. Jonathan Taylor for Travis Kelsey. Fair or not?
I think it's fair. Yeah, I like it.
Fair. Okay, so
I mean, was this pre Marlon Mack injury or was this after the injury?
This is after. This was today. So
yeah, I think
all
it's
information was there.
Had this happened prior to the injury, it could have been a little sketchy. But right now, I mean, there's no reason that JT can't finish top 5.
Yeah. So my thing is, so now I can't make that trade anymore because she traded away her backup running back. Now Jonathan Taylor's off the table. So it was a mess. But now that we're on to fantasy advice, let's keep it going. We're gonna take some questions from the socials here. We had a few on Twitter for start sit, so we're gonna start there. Let me pull those up here. So first one that we had, which is an interesting one, PPR. Tariq Cohen, he's got the Giants this week, taking on or Ronald Jones playing against Carolina again. PPR scoring format.
I mean, this one's tough for me because I'm a huge Bears fan. I'm sure you see the signed Cutler helmet right over here. I'm a huge Bears
Cutler's
fan.
My guy.
How could he not be? I mean, he's great. But and I'm also a huge Leonard Fournette fan. But I think that Rojo is the right move here. I think that Fournette's the better runner, better blocker, better pass catcher, all that. And I think eventually he's going to run away with the job. But right now, it's Rojo's backfield. It's going to take Fournette a couple weeks to get up to speed. Josh Jacobs just gashed the Giants for, what was it, Carolina for, 150 yards or something like that, and 3 touchdowns. So I think until Carolina shows that they can stop the run, I think Rojo's a move this week.
Yeah, see, I like Rojo as well, at least until Leonard Fournette starts to creep into this backfield. If he does at all, we don't really know. But Cohen's just he doesn't really have the volume. I don't think to really give himself the edge there, even in PPR.
Yeah, if he couldn't keep off Peyton Barber last year, he's not going to be able to keep out Leonard Fournette this year.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see how that ends up playing out. So the next one we have comes from Adam Koffler on Twitter. And his was in half PPR. We're picking one of these 3 guys: Deontay Johnson, J.K. Dobbins, Zach Moss. Who are you starting out of these 3 guys?
I mean, that's not a bad problem to have. If you got all 3 of those guys, I mean, you can plug all of them in, and they're all solid flex options. But I got to go Deontay Johnson. We haven't seen Big Ben playing at home in a little while, but if my memory serves me correctly, Big Ben balls out in Pittsburgh. So, Johnson's coming off 10 targets on Monday night. Everyone forgets that because Juju was the one that had the huge game with a couple touchdowns. But Pittsburgh's offense, when Big Ben is under center, they've always been able to support 2 top wide receivers. It was Mike Wallace, and I can't remember who else back in the day. And then it was Antonio Brown and Juju for a little while. I think it's going to be Juju and Deontay right now. So, I think you got to go Deontay in this one.
Okay. Yeah. See, I like Deontay Johnson too. I actually have him in a couple of my leagues. I'm in 8 fantasy leagues, which is just, I'm never going to do that again. Two of them are paid and one's a dynasty league. Those are the 3 that I actually care about because they're with my friends. The other 5, I got carried away with drafting this year. Never doing that again.
Drafting's the fun part. Managing them during the season, though.
Right, exactly.
Now I'm just as on the app, I'm just scrolling through
right, exactly. So I think next year I'm just going to do mock drafts to deal with that.
There you go. Get that fixed somehow.
We have a follow-up question here from Twitter from Mike's younger brother.
Hey.
We have so Deontay Johnson or Emmanuel Sanders this week.
I'm still going to go Deontay Johnson because I think he's got a much higher floor. And if I'm being honest, I think he's got a higher ceiling too. Emmanuel Sanders, I think he's going to be a solid option this week. I know we talked about him a little bit, wanted to keep an eye on him, but I think Deontay Johnson's the real deal.
Yeah, agreed. I think Deontay Johnson is definitely, especially in Pittsburgh's offense, is certainly going to be.
I remember when Juju had his breakout year, he was balling out every single week once that season started. And it took people almost 8 weeks until they finally started putting some respect on his name and putting him in that conversation as a top 10. And everyone was saying, well, Antonio Brown's the number 1 wide receiver, so we can't, put Juju up in there. But Big Ben, he throws the ball 600 times a year. You can support 2 receivers. And I think Deontay Johnson is going to have a huge breakout this season.
Yeah. So we're going to take this next question from our YouTube comments here, our frequent All-In podcast collaborator, Deshaun Turner. We are in a 2 quarterback. I'm pretty sure this is for our dynasty league. No, it's not actually. But anyway, 2 quarterback league, obviously. We're looking at Russ, Cam, Kyler.
All right.
Starting 2. So who gets the boot here?
Before I give this advice, are either of you guys playing against Deshaun this week? I mean, should I?
I played him in 2 leagues last week, so
sabotage him.
I'm free of him.
That guy.
Yeah,
anyway.
I love all 3 of those guys this year, but I think it's kind of a no-brainer. You got to go with Russ and Kyler right now. Cam's coming off a real hot week 1, but I think you want to see it a little bit more consistently before you start putting him in your lineup. I mean, Russ, he's been a top guy for years now. Kyler, he's that guy that everyone was talking about being the huge sleeper this year. Yeah. He showed up. He led the league, he led the league in rushing week 1 for quarterbacks. Yeah. So I think Russ and Kyler is kind of the no-brainer on this one.
Agreed. I like Kyler a lot. I took him in our dynasty league because long term I think he's going to have an excellent career. So I'm a big fan of Kyler Murray as well.
Yeah, I mean he was great last year, and people were talking about him as a sleeper before DeAndre Hopkins came in town. Yeah. So you've already got a guy that's got this breakout potential, and then you give him what I believe is the best wide receiver in the league. I mean, he's poised for a huge year.
Yeah. So next one we have is also coming from Twitter, Alex Burns. And maybe we got the answer to this one, kind of with the Michael Thomas news. But rest of the season, Jared Cook, Hunter Henry, who you taking?
I'm going Jared Cook. The tight ends are kind of a crapshoot once you get out of the top 3 this year. You got Kelsey, you got Kittle, you got Andrews. And then after that, when you're looking at like 4 through 20, I mean, you can make an argument to just shuffle those guys around anywhere. So what I'm looking at is the teams that they play for. The Saints, they're high-powered offense. They're going to score. Tyrod Taylor did not look good week 1. It seemed like he was leaning on Mike Williams more than anybody. I think if you put them both in a bubble, I think that Hunter Henry is the better football player. But given the teams that they play for, I'd prefer Jared Cook over Hunter Henry this year.
Can I follow up with another tight end question then? And maybe we should have talked about this when we talked about the Eagles. But what do you make of the Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert conversation where, obviously Ertz is year in and year out one of these top guys, but in week 1, Goddard was getting the majority of targets and catches. How would you treat those 2 going forward?
Yeah, that's a tough one because both of those guys are crazy talented. The big reason that you were able to start both guys last year is because they didn't have any wide receivers. Alshon was hurt, Deshaun Jackson was hurt, but now, Alshon is still hurt, but he should be coming back at some point in time. Deshaun Jackson's there. They drafted Raygor, so it kind of muddies the waters a little bit. I think having that wide receiver core that they have now that they didn't have last year, I think all that does is lower the ceiling for both of those players. Yeah. So I've been avoiding them because they're both really talented, and Wentz likes them both, and it's really tough to decide who's going to be the better player week in and week out.
Agreed. So next one we have is coming from Twitter as well, from Troy King. He asks Preston Williams or Paris Campbell in half-point PPR this week.
This is a tough one, but I like Paris Campbell. He's already displayed a pretty great rapport with Phillip Rivers. He took a lot of his snaps out of the slot, which We saw what Phillip Rivers has done over the last couple of years with Keenan Allen coming out of the slot.
Yeah.
I mean, he likes throwing to running backs. He likes throwing to tight ends. He likes throwing to slot receivers. He likes those really high percentage, easy throws. Preston Williams, it looked like he had a dud last week. I think he only had 2 catches. I don't think it was anything crazy, but I believe he actually saw 7 targets. So the Patriots are a pretty stingy pass defense, even with all the players that opted out. Bill Belichick always gets those guys to play hard on defense. So it's a tough one, but if I had to choose, I'd be going with Paris Campbell.
Paris Campbell. Okay.
Yeah.
And so we have another comment from Crystal on YouTube. What do you think about Noah Fant? So where's he rank amongst your tight ends?
I'm glad somebody asked. I love Noah Fant this year. He's a guy that I targeted in just about every single one of my leagues. Drew Lock, he looked a little raw last year. He made some, bonehead rookie mistakes, but I expect him to take a huge step forward this year. I'm a Bears fan, but I live in Colorado, so I get to follow the Broncos pretty closely.
Gotcha.
Anybody that saw Noah Fant play week 1 on Monday, he's a grown man. He gets the ball when he wants it. I really, really like Noah Fant this year. As far as rankings, like I said, it's so hard to rank once you get past those top 3. But, he's, in my opinion, a tight end 1, albeit a little bit on the lower side.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of Noah Fant, too. Not only this year, but just long term. I think he has a ton of potential. So next question we have comes from Sean as well. This one is a start sit between Juju or Kenny Galladay this week.
I'm going Juju, definitely. Galladay, he's coming off a hamstring injury, and those linger. He was unable to suit up last week. I think he's still technically questionable for this week, but even if he gets the green light, I'm going with Juju Smith-Schuster. He looked awesome this week.
Yeah.
This is the first time we've seen Ben Roethlisberger play without Antonio Brown in a while. He's got to find a new wide receiver number 1, and I think that's going to be Juju this year.
Yeah. And, so that was the thing, right? Is that, with Antonio Brown leaving last year, we weren't really sure whether Juju was ready to step in that role. And we couldn't really figure it out last year, given the quarterback situation after Big Ben goes down in week 2. Week 1, if you were someone who thought Juju had that talent and capability, I think week 1 kind of, eases that or confirms that for you so far.
Yeah.
So I think Juju has, top tier, high end wide receiver 2, maybe low end wide receiver 1.
Yeah, I'm putting him in low end wide receiver 1. If he stays healthy and Ben stays healthy, that's the biggest question mark with that situation right now is both of their healths. But if those guys can both stay healthy, there's no reason that he isn't finishing inside the top 10.
Agreed.
Love it.
So we're going to finish this one off as far as ranking advice, things like that. We have one more. Jonathan Taylor, obviously, after the Marlon Mack injury, he's done for the year. A lot of people were high on Jonathan Taylor coming into the season because we kind of knew how injury prone, for one, Marlon Mack was on a contract year and probably on his way out. So we knew where they were going to phase Jonathan Taylor into this offense, coming into the year. Now Mack's out of the equation. What's Jonathan Taylor's? What's his ceiling? And then what's his rest of the season ranking realistically?
Well, I think his ceiling is, the number 1 running back in fantasy football. I don't think there's any reason that he couldn't. I had him rated as the best rookie coming into the draft this year. So you take what I believe to be the best rookie and put him behind what I believe to be the best offensive line.
Yeah.
And then put him with a quarterback that loves checking down to running backs. That's just a recipe for a huge, huge season. He looks smooth on the routes that he was running last week. I think the one thing that can really hold him back a little bit is how Nyheim Hines gets into the mix.
Yeah.
That's kind of the scary thing right now. You don't know how this backfield is going to shake out, but they want to keep Hines in there. Phil Rivers, targeted Hines quite a few times last week. So I think it, worst case scenario though, I don't think he finishes outside the top 20 this year.
Yeah. I think you could lock him in top 20 for sure. Especially because what I was really encouraged with in week 1 was his passing game involvement. We knew Hines, was going to get that kind of involvement. Phillip Rivers loves to throw to running backs. but if Jonathan Taylor can consistently get you 2 or 3 catches additionally on top of the, workload he's going to get rushing, yeah, I mean, I don't see why, he can't be for this season a top 10 running back or an RB1, and then long term, I think his ceiling is through the roof as well. I have him in Dynasty, so that's good news for me.
Hey, that's a good Dynasty stash right there.
Yeah.
I think, a lot of people keep trying to compare the situation in Indianapolis right now to what the Chargers had going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a dangerous game because there's so many other factors. But, everyone's expecting Hines to take on that Eckler role. And if he does, that could actually be pretty bad for Jonathan Taylor's value, though. Eckler had a lot of red zone touches last year. And I think everybody with that huge powerhouse offensive line was expecting Jonathan Taylor anytime they get within the 5-yard line, just, pound the rock until they get in. Right. Phillip Rivers, though, he really likes to check down in the red zone. You'll see him take a snap out of the shotgun. And if he's got a running back lined up on a linebacker, he'll take that one-on-one coverage and try to check down in the end zone. So Hines could end up cutting into the goal line carries a little bit. That's the one thing that I'd be nervous about.
Yeah, so, obviously high ceiling for Jonathan Taylor. We'll see, how that backfield plays out without Marlon Mack going forward. And I think we'll finish up here. We have a general fantasy advice question on just approach in season long. So question here is, what's your overall strategy on the waiver wire? So whether it's, we'll talk a little bit about the snake waiver wire, and then also for auction wires where you have a budget and you're buying players. What's your strategy in maneuvering on the waiver wire?
Well, just to give you an example, I dropped $32 on Hines this morning, 32 of my 100 free agent dollars for the year. I mean, I always go after those running backs that can pop off. You saw James Conner was a league winner a couple of years ago. He went undrafted in every single league. Yeah. And then week 1, everyone snagged him off the waiver wire. And I think he was on something crazy. It was like 38% of championship teams or something. So there's always those guys that pop up. A lot of people take the approach of wanting to hold on to their waiver priority and their free agent or their auction money as long as possible. I've got no problem spending that early. I used it early last year on Darren Waller. I used it early 2 years ago on James Conner. These first couple of weeks, there's so much speculation in the off season. We can sit here and talk about everything happening in summer camps and what happened last year and, how this guy likes playing with other players. But really, until we see it in game action, that's when you start to make those, better conclusions. So I think that if there's guys available right now, Benny Snell look great. Benny Snell's a guy that if he's on your waiver wire, go after him. I know we're kind of most people run waivers Wednesday morning, so we might have missed it already. But right. Benny Snell's a guy that you should have been going after. I know I was kind of talking bad about Malcolm Brown, but realistically, I mean, he's a guy that you could pick up and he could be a year-long flex play. And if you can get somebody like that off the waiver wire, you're hoping that in the 5th or 6th round you can get somebody that you can play in your flex every single week. So if you're able to snag somebody off the waiver wire, that's crazy valuable.
Yeah, definitely. So, and then last thing we have, just from a strategic standpoint. So it's a little early to maybe, consider this now, but say you're 3, maybe 4 weeks, maybe too late. But let's say you're 3 weeks in, you don't quite have a win yet, or you're 4 weeks in sitting at 1-3, something like that. What's your strategy to a bad start in fantasy? Like, are you hitting the waiver wire heavy? Are you looking to kind of move your best players for, a multitude of guys? Let's, say you have McCaffrey or an elite player on just stuck on a bad team. Are you moving him, trying to fill out the rest of your roster and try to get as many pieces back as you can? Or are you trying to play the waiver wire and hoping, something hits?
So like you lose a guy like Evans and you've got Mixon available. Do you try to trade Mixon for 2 guys? Something like that.
Exactly like that, Dave.
Yeah, I think that's what you got to do. And that's something, we've got a guy in my league right now, my hometown league with my buddies, and he drafted Michael Thomas. He drafted Chris Godwin. He drafted Miles Sanders. And I mean, everybody that he took, all of his top picks are out right now. So what he's trying to do is trade those players that are currently injured in hopes for some high upside guys. So, you've got Joshua Kelly, you've got Hines, like we talked about earlier, and these guys, even Leonard Fournette right now, he's not doing anything right now, but a lot of people see the potential that he has. So I think that's what you got to do. If you're just off to a brutal start, it's tough to bite that bullet, but bring in a package of 3 or 4 guys with high upside. Rookies are always guys that take a little bit longer to develop. So, it's tough getting rid of a guy like Christian McCaffrey or Michael Thomas or something like that. But if you can get a package of young players with upside, I think that's the move you got to make.
Yeah. And see, this is my first year playing in a dynasty league. So like for me, I think in dynasty, that's a pretty easy question, right? It's like, all right, well, this year
Rebuild.
I'm not going to be good, right? Go into rebuild mode. But like in a one season kind of thing, it's kind of hard because you're like, all right, well, if I trade McCaffrey and he, these other guys I don't get back aren't doing anything. Well, one, I can't get any worse than what I am. But like, It's like you said, it's always hard to let go of those, top tier guys, especially when you invested so much draft capital in them. It's really hard.
Right. I'd say something to be really careful about too, if you find yourself in a situation like that, is that if you're trading away your top player for a package, you don't want to trade him away to a team that's sitting in first or second place.
Right.
Because, then it just kind of ruins the league for everybody else.
Yeah.
And I've seen that happen before where some guys just got a loaded roster and then some guy who's out of it just makes some BS trade towards the end of the year, hoping that it can turn the season around. And then you've got the first place team ended up with Kelsey or McCaffrey or something like that.
Right.
So I think you got to be fair that, you're making a trade that is helping you, but also isn't going to ruin the league for everybody else. Nobody wants the league taco throwing a wrench into the league.
Yeah.
Right. That's a good tip. Fantasy integrity is everything.
Yes.
100%.
Yes, absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely. And hopefully you have a good commish / veto system, however your league does it. To kind of avoid those kind of things from happening. So we actually had something like that. I'm not sure if you were in the league yet then, Mike, but we had something like that happen 2 years ago. Of course, I was the commissioner when this happened. So it all fell to me. The group chat was going crazy. And it all stemmed from, the owners in the league voted to push the deadline back, which was a huge mistake. Okay, and then towards the end of the year, guy tries to trade away like Le'Veon Bell, I think it was, or something like that. And it would have been a fair trade, right? If you're looking at all that he gave up for Bell, but it's like, okay, you're not going to make the playoffs regardless of what happens here. So it's not a trade that really should go through.
So what we do in my league is we had the same problem. A few years ago, we had some guy, we're allowed 2 keepers, and some kid drafted Chubb, who was going to be a great keeper the next year, and his season was over. So the other guy's season was over, and what he did was he gave up David Johnson and Keenan Allen, who were both having awesome seasons, gave away his 2 top picks so he can pull in Chubb and have the good keeper for next year. So what we started doing after that is now after week 4, we look at the bottom teams, and we vote as a league whether that team is allowed to trade. So if you've got a guy who's sitting at 0-6, we're going to sit down as a league and we're going to say, hey, Jim Bob over here is sitting at 0-6. Should he be allowed to trade? And if 6 people say, no, we're cutting trading for him, then there's no trades with that team for the rest of the season.
Wow. Interesting. Okay.
It is interesting.
Yeah, and that's in a dynasty league from what it sounds like where you have keepers where, I don't know if you guys trade draft picks or anything like that or how that really works, but interesting that that's an approach that you guys take in a league with keepers.
And this we do 2 keepers and then redraft the rest. So that's kind of why we had to throw that quirky rule in there because it's a little bit different than a full blown dynasty, but it's enough that one guy who's sitting in last place could really ruin the league for the rest of the people.
Right.
Right, because in that case, right, you're only doing 2. When you do keepers, you lose that draft pick that player was taken in, right? Is that how you guys operate, or?
Ours is a little bit different. We do the top. Everybody that you draft after the second round is available as a keeper. So your first 2 rounds are off limits, and then after that, you get to keep any 2 players you want.
Gotcha. Okay. So, and obviously Nick Chubb would not have gone in the first 2 rounds when this trade was happening.
Right.
So, okay.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
And then David Johnson and Keenan Allen were the first and second round picks. So he said, well, my season's over here. You take my 2 first picks, give me Chubb, and then I'm set for next year.
Come on.
Right.
No. Yeah, you gotta veto that one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up. So Dave, before we end the show today, tell the people where they can find you, your articles and things like that, and where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, so the pregame HQ, that's where I've been putting a lot of my focus recently. I do, a plethora of articles on there, but the big thing I'm doing for them right now is the buy low, sell high. I'm big into trading. I think trading is the best part of fantasy football. So check out my buy low, sell high article. And then you can find me on Twitter at DKluge90. That's DKLUGE 90. And then you can find me on Fantasy Pros as well. I got my own page on there where I'll keep you up to date with all of the newest NFL news.
Awesome.
Yeah, man. So we appreciate you joining the show today and, talking some fantasy and some NFL with us for week 2. And again, thank you to everybody who has tuned in, left comments, and those of you who gave us some questions on social media for Dave to answer. We appreciate you giving us a little bit of time. So if you are watching on YouTube, don't forget we did earlier. We have a separate video out now with the Nuggets Clippers Game 7 recap and also Heat Celtics Game 1 recap. We did that as a separate video, so you can catch that on our YouTube channel. If you're watching on the live right now, it'll be available tomorrow. If you're watching the replay, it's already up for you to go check it out there. And if you're tuning in on audio, make sure you leave a like, leave a rating and a review on Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever platform you're listening on to help out the podcast. Mike, anything else we got going on with the network?
Yeah, if you're watching on YouTube and you aren't watching the live, turn on the notification button when you subscribe. So next time we go live, maybe Dave will be back sometime soon and we go live again. You'll get a notification when we're going live. Allinnetwork.net is kind of the hub where you can find everything we're doing, all the different podcasts and the different articles that we write on there as well.
Yep, and hoodie season is upon us. Make sure you grab some merch on allinnetwork.net.
Yes.
You can find some All In Network merch there. Don't forget to follow us on the socials. You've probably seen it throughout the show today at all_in_pod on Twitter, on Instagram, All In Network. We're also on Facebook, All In Network as well. So make sure you follow us on all those platforms. We let you know when we're going live or when new episodes are dropping for all of the podcasts that are under our network. But thank you guys again for tuning in to another episode of the All In Podcast. This is episode 39. Signing off. Thank you guys again for tuning in.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Dave. You're the man.
No problem, man.